Morning Year 4 and welcome to your reading lesson on Wednesday the 3rd of February, where we are going to continue with our skill of explaining the effect of specific features and how that affects the reader. So why the author chooses specific features. So to be successful, we're going to consider the effect on you and others as readers, as I just said, and consider the features that F.S. Said, our author we're looking at, chooses when writing. And you're going to independently identify the key information in a question and record your answers. Okay. So let's start with, similar to what we did yesterday, describe how an author uses these features. So can you remember? And I've added one different one. So we've got italics, exclamation mark, comma, and inverted commas. Pause the video and write down your answers. Okay, so if you remember, inverted commas was for speech, commas were for short pauses in lists and other sentences where we need more information. Exclamation marks come at the end of a sentence to mark excitement or surprise. And italics give emphasis to something or change the way something is said. Okay, let's read chapter 8 of Varjak Poor, and I want you to write down as many examples of explanatory sentences as you can. So do you agree that these sentences need exclamation marks? What are they showing? And what if a sentence did not end in an exclamation mark? How would that change the text for you as a reader? So why is the author putting one there? What effect is it giving you? Okay, that's what I want you to think about as you're reading, and at the end write down some sentences. So normally you would independently read this, and that's fine. But for those of you who are finding it difficult to see a screen for any reason, I am going to read it. Varjak awoke at the foot of the wall. His head was pounding, his paws aching. It wasn't quite light yet, but the night was almost over. The fall from the tree must have knocked him out. What a dream! He wondered if he'd ever have another like it. He shivered. It was cold out in the open, and the grass beneath his body was wet. He stood up, shook the moisture from his fur, and looked around. The view cleared his head instantly. Outside was nothing he'd seen or even dreamed of. The Contessa's house stood on top of a high hill. Beneath it was a broad green park. Beyond it, away in the distance, was a city. Stretched out under the open sky, shining like silver in the pre-dawn light, the city was a huge, mad jumble of shapes and sizes. It had tall towers, gleaming steel and glass, but also squat brick houses, dark with chimney smoke. So for those of you who weren't sure what the Sea of Lights meant in the previous chapter, that was the city that he is seeing now, okay? The city that he'd never seen before because he'd been in the Contessa's house all his life. Wide open gardens jostled with narrow alleys, sharp pointy spires topped soft curved domes, concrete blocks loomed over bright painted billboards. They were all in there together, side by side, each one part of the whole. There was so much he couldn't take in. All he could hear from here was the wind rustling through the treetops, but down in the city it looked noisy and bustling, a place that never went to sleep. His whiskers twitched with a mix of energy, excitement, danger. His heart beat faster, just looking at it. It seemed like a city where anything could happen, and probably did. A place you could do whatever you liked and no one would stop you. Where you'd be able to find everything you wanted, even a dog. The terror of the night before, the fight with the gentleman's cats, it seemed a long time ago, and very far away there was sadness in his heart for the elder poor, deep sadness, but his grandfather had trusted him with a mission. It was his duty as a Blue to save the family, and Varjak intended to see it through. He ventured down the hill. It was steeper than it looked, and soon he found himself running almost rolling down the slope. But it was joy to stretch out in the open. A splash of sunshine lit the horizon. He'd never seen a sunrise before, and the sky outside was alive with streaks of amber light. The sky flashed past his eyes as he sped up, sprinted to the bottom. He bounded over a fence at the foot of the hill and into the park. Around this time, back in the Contessa's house, the family would be waking up and licking each other clean. Barjack grinned. He hated washing, and already there was satisfying build-up of mud between his claws. Next, the family would obediently munch their food out of china bowls. It would be the gentleman's vile-smelling caviar today. But now that he was outside, he wouldn't have to eat anything he didn't like. He could choose what to eat and when to eat. After eating, the family would go to their litter trays. Ha! Barjack crouched by a tree. No litter tray for him today. It felt good. It felt natural. It felt, he thought, like it ought to feel. This was how it would be in the future. It was going to be the best time of his life. He'd return from the city with a dog, whatever a dog was, and defeat the gentleman and his strange black cats. Then he'd lead his family out of that stuffy old house into this wonderful new world. They'd all say he was a proper Mesopotamian blue, a true son of Jalal. They'd offer him every kind of honour and reward, but he'd turn them down. I did it for the glory of the family, he'd say humbly, and they would cheer him even more. Barjack wandered further and further in his happy days. He barely noticed the fiery shades of sunrise burn out, leaving a sky the colour of cold ashes. A violent sound cut through his thoughts. It was like shrieking and roaring at the same time, and it scared him. The sound came from a black road that circled the park in the distance. He crept towards it, ears pressed against his skull, and then he saw them. It was a column of fearsome monsters. They were rolling down the road, roaring at each other and everything around them. Huge monsters made of metal with sharp edges all around. They had yellow eyes at the front and red eyes at the back. They moved on round black wheels which turned so fast it made Barjack dizzy, and they belched a trail of choking smoke behind them on the wind. Could these be dogs? What were the elder Paul's words? These monsters were big enough to kill a man. Their breath was foul, their sound was deafening, and they filled his heart with fear. This was it. He was sure they were dogs. He'd found them. A hard, tight ball of terror formed in Barjack's stomach. How was he supposed to talk to these monsters? They didn't look as if they'd stop for anyone, let alone a kitten. As he edged closer to the procession of metal beasts, all his happy thoughts about the future faded like a false sunrise. Slow time, moving circles, shadow walking. He shook his head. How were those words supposed to help? Why had the elder Paul trusted him with such an impossible mission? Why hadn't he chosen someone older and stronger, someone like Julius? Julius might know what to do with a dog. Barjack did not. The quest was too hard. It was impossible. The ball of terror in his stomach turned into a heavy lump of despair. A drop of rain splattered on his shoulder. Barjack grimaced. He hated water on his fur. At home, he would rush in through the cat door as soon as the weather changed. If only he could do that now. He glanced at the high hill behind him. He couldn't see the house from here. A gust of wind sliced across his face. The sky darkened. A storm was coming. He could feel it. Shelter. That was what he needed. Notice the short sentences here again for effect that we talked about in the past. Once he was safe from the storm, he could think about the dogs, but there was no shelter in this wide open park. There were only trees, solitary trees with no leaves swaying in the wind. They wouldn't keep him warm and dry. The sky darkened. The wind cut through his coat. Barjack could clearly see each blade of grass, each fallen leaf, trembling alone before the storm. Shelter. He had to find shelter, and fast. Rain came down from the darkening sky, thick, wet rain that dripped into his fur, weighing him down with water. He tried to shake it off, but once it started, the rain kept coming. His family were right. Outside was no place for a cat. It was no place at all. In the distance, behind the naked, shivering trees, he glimpsed something that he'd missed before. A small wooden hut. A shelter! He fought his way towards it. The rain whipped into his eyes. The wind pushed him back one step for every two he took. The ground was turning into a churning sea of mud. His paws slipped and sloshed wildly. Splash! Barjack fell into a pool of oozing mud. Dark, dirty water seeped out of his mouth. He was covered in brown and green slime. He could feel it squelching all around him, soaking into his skin. The wind howled at him like a wounded animal. Too far, it howled. You've gone too far. A claw of white light slashed the belly of sky. There was a moment of horrible silence, and then the earth juddered with thunder, shaking beneath him as if it would break in two. Help me, Jalal, he cried. But Only the sky answered, bellowing again with angry thunder, making him wish he hadn't spoken. Varjak wiped the slime from his eyes and dragged himself to the hut. It smelled of soggy timber and had no windows, only a door. The door was closed. He pushed, it moved, but only a crack. Desperate, he flung himself at the flimsy wood that stood between him and shelter from the storm, and the door swung open. Okay, again, we've left on a bit of a cliffhanger. What's going to be inside that shelter? So explain the effect that writing has in italics, e.g. when hello becomes hello. Did you see any italics? We definitely saw one here, splash. So this indicated that I needed to say it in a really different way, and it was explaining that water effect. But then also the speech of the wind was used in italics as well to show something different. Because obviously the wind wasn't perhaps actually speaking, which is why the author didn't use inverted commas. He wanted to show the wind was acting like it was speaking. Okay, so we've noticed this chapter has less speech than the previous chapter. So let's match the adjective describing Varjak to the description of his actions this time. So you can do this on Teams. All of the questions I'm about to give to you are all on a Teams assignment that you can fill in, edit, change, and send in. But if you can't access it for any reason, then please do it on here, or print it out, or write it down. Why does Efed say choose to write long sentences to describe one word? Why do you think that? So it was his, so let's match, so choose the adjective here to match one of these descriptions, okay? So it was his duty as a blue to save the family, and Varjak intended to see it through. Is that amazed, confident, hopeful, or gleeful, which means that you're very, very joyful? He was like, you've won. Triumphant, you've won. He'd never seen a sunrise before, and the sky outside was alive with streaks of amber light. So again, is it amazed, confident, hopeful, or gleeful? You can only choose one per box, remember. Varjak grinned. He hated washing, and already there was satisfying build-up of mud. And the last one, then he'd lead his family out of that stuffy old house into this wonderful new world. I won't show you the answers yet, and if you don't want to see the answers, if you're doing the Teams assignment, then remember not to look. Okay, so all our previous statements we've just discussed describe Varjak in a positive way, but does he stay positive throughout the chapter? Have a think to yourself. A hard, tight ball of terror formed in Varjak's stomach. What adjective could be used to describe this description of how Varjak was feeling? And then another feature of this chapter is similes. What is a simile? So we talked about that yesterday. Can you remember? Okay, so simile is comparing two things that aren't normally alike. So which one of these are true or false? Can you work it out? So outside was like nothing he had ever seen or even dreamed of. Is that a simile, true or false? The city was shining like silver in the pre-dawn light. His whiskers twitched with a mix of energy, excitement, and danger. It was like shrieking and roaring at the same time, and it scared him. The wind howled at him like a wounded animal. And once you've done that, can you find any more opportunities for similes in this chapter? And if so, where would you put them and what would you write? That's like an extra task. Okay, so now I'm going to move on to the answers. So again, if you don't want to see them, make sure you end the video now. So this one, I'm going to start with. So it was his duty to save the family. He's confident. He feels he can do it. He intended to see it through. He'd never seen the sunrise. He'd never seen that beautiful sky, so he was amazed. He grinned. He hated washing. So that was the bit where he didn't have to clean himself at home. He didn't have to use the litter tray. So he was gleeful. He was triumphantly joyful. He wanted to lead his family out of the stuffy old house into this new wonderful world, so he is hopeful. Here, the adjective you might want to have used is worried. So we can say that he doesn't stay positive throughout the chapter. He starts to feel much more worried when he sees the dogs. And then the similes. Now, some of you just thought whenever you saw the word like that it would be a simile, but you have to be very careful with that because remember, it's comparing two unlike things and saying they're like each other. But sometimes you'll get a like in a sentence and it's not doing that. So outside was like nothing he had ever seen or ever dreamed of, or even dreamed of. It's not comparing anything. It's just saying that it was like this. It's a statement. So that's not a simile, it's false. The city was shining like silver. So there we are comparing the city to something. And so that's true. His whiskers twitched with a mix of energy, excitement, and danger. That's just information. That's false. It was like shrieking and roaring at the same time, and it scared him. Again, we're not comparing two unlike things. We're just saying this is what's happening. It was like shrieking and roaring at the same time. So it's false. And the wind howled at him like a wounded animal. Well, there you are comparing the wind to a wounded animal. So that is a simile, and that is true. So hopefully you've seen the difference there with the use of like. Okay, fantastic. Well, well done for all your hard work, and I look forward to seeing your work either completed on Teams or emailed in. Take care, and we'll see you for reading comprehension tomorrow.